What's up chaps, I'm MagicalMike and this is the first part of the Dragon's Reach patch. Seeing as how this whole patch was basically story, I'll be outright talking about the spoilers here, so if you're worried about that, you don't want to listen to it, then now's your chance to avoid it. So, we start out by having a chat with the Pale Tree, and I found that most of the instances apart from two of them only really serve as private areas in which you can interact with the characters. They're plot instances with no real gameplay, other than clicking on dialogue responses. And I suppose that this news alone would divide opinions a lot, because it sounds like you have a lot less to do in this patch. And while that isn't necessarily the case, I can certainly see that point of view. Anyway, as I said, most of these instances involve just speaking to characters and getting some plot exposition. As a Norn, I don't get anything special in the first area, and I'm starting to feel a bit cheated by that fact. You might say that it adds some replayability as a Sylvari, but honestly I'd like to be told a little more than I normally get anyway. There's been a few instances where I couldn't get more info just because of my race or my profession, either not being a Sylvari or an engineer, and that's starting to get a little bit disappointing. Also on that note, there's another couple of instances later where I can't even tell if I get special conversations with Brahm and Air, because Norn topics aren't really as obvious as Sylvari or Azuran stuff. So, again, even if I am getting special stuff, I can't tell if I am, because Norn, basically. On that though, I did notice that there's some development of Brahm's character this time, and I do appreciate that, so good, they're working on stuff that I'm complaining at, which is good. So we're told a bunch of stuff, and we get some curious interactions with the Pale Tree, who sounds a little bit shifty at this point in the plot. I don't think anything of it, but it sounds kind of strange that she's asking so many questions. And then we get told to go off to the Iron Marches. Now despite the lack of gameplay, as I said, I was actually enjoying the mix of text and voice acted scenes between various characters. The level of interactivity was just enough with those text conversations that it wasn't boring. The tiny instance was alright. I thought that there were some nice touches with the Arcane Council members talking badly behind her back, and getting to play around with Scruffy. I quite liked the simple puzzles involved with picking up the ingredients correctly as well. I did notice that they're dancing around the Zoja issue again though, which is again, it breaks the immersion, it breaks the fourth wall sort of, and I'm not really sure of what they can do at this point, but it's a little bit strange, and every time it comes up it's sort of a bit of a poke and a realisation that, oh yeah, Zoja isn't in the story for various reasons. Overall again though, it's not a bad instance as part of the whole of this patch, and because there's a larger quantity of these instances than in these patches than before, it's more acceptable to me to have them be this much simpler. I'm fine with it, and I'm quite enjoying it so far. Between instances though, there are these sections where the story takes us into the open world, so we go into Iron Marches, Frostgorge Sound, and then briefly into Blaze Ridge and Diessa Plateau, and a little bit into the Plains of Ashford. All of these steps have one thing in common though, and I absolutely, let me get this really clear, I love the idea of this mechanic. The story itself intertwining with regular dynamic events in the open world. It's a fantastic combination of traditional questing systems and Guild Wars 2's open world experience. A quest to go here and help this person, which then turns into an event, I think is a very, very good compromise. And I really like how it adds a new sort of a flow to the gameplay. It feels well integrated and well put together. I really appreciate this. And there's a few new events to do in the Iron Marches, which are all to do with the Mordrum. There's nothing spectacular, but it's nice to see that there's still new events to actually experience. There's also a few areas around these events with huge finds which are erupting out of the ground and transforming, albeit very, very small areas, but it's still cool to see. And it's still early days yet on how much Mordremoth can affect such vast distances and things like that in dev time, but that's behind the scenes. But hopefully we'll see much more of this stuff as time goes on, because as I said, it's pretty cool and I like having the scenery change like that. I also appreciated that I found myself checking out old scenery a bunch too. There's a few times where I turn the UI off, not just to record some cool shots, but also to really take a look at the scene of a load of players all fighting an onslaught of Svanir, for example. Really interesting to notice myself doing that sort of stuff. However, while all of these things sound great, it's not come without a lot of issues, and normally I can forgive progress blocking bugs, but this time I have to mention that I was stuck in Frostgorge for 3 days before I could actually finish the events there. It did have an impact, and That's a little bit sad, actually. Obviously, there's always going to be problems when there's so many people needing to do the same thing at the same time in the open world. Things like events breaking constantly. I had to wait around for a lot of time between some events, and that whole waiting around to have fun thing came up a bunch. The Zergs made many of the events seem trivialised in scope. A lot of the events were pre-existing and therefore not that interesting. A lot of them were already done when I got there, which made me completely ignore them and not have to experience them. I got stuck in the scenery at one point, and a few of the reasons for even going to these areas were just a bit flimsy. Now let me try and elaborate before I have to deal with a bunch of the comments about how wrong and complaining I'm being. Hold on, hold your horses, let me get some stuff straight. The biggest problem I had with the first season of The Living Story was the Zerg content. It seemed like a filler way of making the living story feel alive, and it sort of ruined the actual gameplay for me. So if we can do anything to avoid it this time, while also keeping those areas involved active, then we absolutely should. A lot of these problems were caused by bottlenecks in waiting for these events and having so many people trying to do them all at once. So we've got to think of solutions to work around that while also keeping the feel of the gameplay quite similar. The first NPC in Iron Marches sends you along a straight path from event to event, A to B to C, and you can't choose your own order in which you want to finish them in. If that NPC were to say act like a regular scout like we previously got in the game, and mark those events on your map and let you do them in any order, I think that might help with some of these problems. It's not like we needed to see each event in order to understand the plot, so I can't see that being an issue. It would definitely help with the waiting around, because we'd have to just look at our map and see which event's active and then we'd move towards that instead, if we wanted to keep advancing the plot. Or perhaps the objective could have been to help with any, say, 4 out of 5 of the events instead, further helping with that previous solution causing Zergs to then migrate to specific points at specific times. It would spread people out a little bit more, and have people move through it a little bit faster because, oh hey, this event's up and this event's up, but I only need to do one of those two. So then people would split more often, and I think it would make that flow a little bit smoother. I don't know though, they'll probably have to try that at some point just to figure out if it's a better solution or not. The other main problem I had was really just having to do old pre-existing events, and while I'm generally okay with that because of the integration of these systems, the reasons for us finishing those events weren't exactly the best. And again, when you turn up and that event's already done and you just have to press F on an object and then move away from the area completely, it wasn't that great. It wasn't the best experience. Maybe have us able to trigger that event again, or do something, I don't know, a little bit more interaction. Again, I'm asking for the same thing, but a little bit more. Come on, you're heading in the right direction, and I really, really like where this is going so far. But for now, I'm okay with it. We just need maybe a little bit more improvement on that. Now, as for the final instance, well, the mechanics of an updated Baradin statue fight are good. It gives you more to think about with the exploding flames and the fear wards and the NPCs to charge Sahothin and break the shield, and the Menders to get rid of. A lot of mechanics here. The more mechanics you add into fights, the more interesting they become. So it's pretty cool and visually very impressive, but I was disappointed with the end of the instance. The explanation for Ritlock jumping into the mists after the sword was very casual, as if he's sort of done this before or something. And I know Smodor's title is the Unflinching, but come on, there's limits here. While it did excite me as a player to see that stuff, it ended so quickly that I was left with an empty sort of feeling where there should have been shock. I do want to find out more about what happens in the mists though, I'm just not exactly on the edge of my seat about it. And again, they made this grave mistake of showing the best thing in the patch in the trailer. They did this with the release trailer by showing us Zaitan. Oh my god, look at the dragon, it's amazing! And then you see it in game and it's like, yeah, we've seen this before, it's not that interesting. Again, with this thing, Ascalon, I free you from this curse. That's the coolest line in the entire patch, and we were spoiled on that. Man, I was disappointed. So the final thing I think I'll talk about very briefly is the scavenger hunt for the back piece, which I haven't done yet, but checking the steps on Dulphy, it looks pretty good for the type of thing that it actually is. Without going into too many details, I don't think the Foxfire acquisition method is that great, but everything else looks kind of interesting, and it looks like the kind of thing that I'd enjoy. There's many different aspects to it, like the crafting and having the sandstorm recipes and things like that. There's a lot to it, and it's quite good. It might even be the makings of, say, a precursor scavenger hunt? Maybe? It's a little bit like the Mad King Memories scavenger hunt that we got at Halloween almost 2 years ago, and I liked that back then, and I like this now, because it's similar. So there's your lot. There's not a great deal to this patch, and it's not without its problems as always, but I felt like the story sort of made up for it this times, in more than a few ways, and we didn't need to drag anything out too much. I think it was succinct, it was to the point, and we got everything in there quite nicely. And I also got what I asked for last time, more interaction with map elements, so hurrah for that. Thanks for watching, tell me what you guys thought of the patch, because as always I read the comments, I'm interested to hear, and I will see you guys next time for part 2 perhaps.